to talk about champion reworks, why we do them, how we do them, and specifically we're going to talk a lot about Irelia. On stage with me is the champion pod that worked on Irelia, and we'll get to them and we'll get to that. But first, just in case there's not any folks in here that don't play League, which is totally fine, we're going to do like a real quick video about kind of what League... It's not fun. Okay, Saul says it's not fun. But this video is for them anyway. The end.
Download now.
That's literally all of it. So, what's a champion rework? What's a VGU? League's been around for a long time, and some of our older champions aren't quite up to speed with some of our newer champions. Well, we'll get to it. But basically, a VGU is when we look at a champion that's maybe not doing so hot, and then try and bring it more up to speed with modern League of Legends. And usually that's done via a champion pod, and that's who you have up here. You've got Soul Kim, design, Jason Hendrick, animation, Jem Lim, art, and John O'Brien, narrative. This is the Irelia pod. And most importantly, me, Mike. I didn't work on Irelia at all. I'm the comms guy, but hi. So I'm going to do a little bit of, basically the way we're going to do this panel is we're going to talk a little bit about reworks in general, then these folks are going to talk about their area of expertise, and we're going to try and do that real quick so we can take questions at the end. Cool? So when we're deciding like what champions we want to do, there's a lot of different factors, but this is one of the actual kind of cool metrics is when we look at like a champion's health, there are champions that have really broad appeal, there are champions that have niche appeal, and then there are champions that are kind of home runs that are popular. So if you look at this data, this is from an old patch. There's probably not a lot of surprises in here, but you can see, like, super popular, not super deep, Blitzcrank. Everybody likes him, you get auto-filled support, you can throw some hooks, it's cool. Super niche, but really hardcore engagement, like a champion like Yorick, right? There's like 2 people on Earth that play Yorick. They play, I'm sorry. My friend's the Yorick main, that was just for him. But the people who play Yorick, they play like 5,000 Yorick games, right? And that's really good. You know, a champion that's got a niche appeal, super cool. Champion that a lot of people play that's not super deep, that's cool too. And then in the upper right, you've got like champions that are just crushing it. Like people love them and they play the hell out of them. Yasuo, right? I love it. Like this is like the diagram of toxicity. It's Yasuo, Riven, Lee Sin, and you know that's a bronze Lee Sin. But anyway, so the bottom left is where we start to see champs that are maybe struggling, right? At the time, I think from this patch, Nunu's like probably the worst jungler in the game. This is Skarner before rework. You can see some champs down there. And this isn't the only metric. There are champions that need a little help that maybe are popular, but it's a useful metric. So just for a quick refresher, some recent champ reworks. Warwick. I see a lot of silver jungle mains out there.
Damn.
Yeah, it's hard stuck. God bless you. So, you know, he's a werewolf dude. Now he's got more of a predator hunting fantasy. We've got Scion, who... You guys can clap for every champ. That's cool. You know, I don't know, old Scion's kind of like an Arnold Schwarzenegger impersonation, and now he's a cool undead juggernaut, and then we've got the boy, Galio. He was, I think his whole character before was like, I'm a sad gargoyle, and now he's like a cool, you know, he fits in League, he's like this protector of Demacia, and I hope, because I'm not a story guy. And then, most recently, Irelia. that's Irelia. That's all that footage is me being amazing. No. So when we decide what champion is next, the next step is we send that champion to what we call a design or a DNA pod, which is these folks. DNA would be design, narrative, art. So for a rework or for an original champion, the idea and the hook can come from any one of those areas. It could be a really cool gameplay idea, it could be an interesting story angle, or it could just be a beautiful piece of concept art. There are champions in League that have all come from one of those angles. And so at this point, I'm going to turn it over to the folks who did those, and we're going to start with Sol Kim, who did Irelia's design. And I want to do a quick disclaimer. We're all awful at decks, and I'm running this one, and so there's a 99% chance that I'm going to screw this up. So heads up. Sol?
Well, all right. I'm Sol. I'm designer on the Irelia VG, or rework, however you call it. First thing I would like to talk about is, why did we actually decide to rework Irelia? There's a lot of reasons to actually rework a champion. Some of them could be design-related, some of them could not be. And even for the design-related questions, some of them may be, specific reasons may be different. The character might just be flat-out boring to play. The character might be terrible to play against. The character might be unbalanceable, whatever that means. And in the case of Irelia, the biggest thing we focused upon was the dissonance between the thematic and her actual gameplay. So what I mean by that is that when we survey people, talk to players and all that kind of stuff, Irelia's thematic has always been super highly rated. People love the idea of the blade, flinging lady, the fantasy of the blade master is super cool and all that kind of people I really want to play this thing. I really like the idea of this character. At the same time, you survey the same people about the gameplay of the character, and they generally get okay, well, this is kind of boring, or doesn't really fit my what I envisioned the character to be doing, basically. And the reason is that when you see a character like this, where you have a sleek lady that's has a bunch of levitating blades, looks deadly and sharp and all that kind of stuff, there's some things you expect from that kind of character. You expect finesse, you expect speed, you expect grace, that kind of stuff, right? And Irelia's whole gameplay was actually comparatively very brute force. She didn't have a lot of tricks up her sleeve. The way she fought you was very numbers driven. Stat check is how we generally call it. And that's not necessarily always bad. Some characters it fits some characters really well, right? Garen is not necessarily a bad character because he's a very straightforward, runs at you and fights you man to man, or whatever that is. But in this specific case, we felt we were doing a disservice to people who actually wanted to have a character that fulfilled the fantasy. And we decided that this character could be a lot more. She had a lot more potential. And we set out to basically try to fulfill that potential, at least bring her closer to that. Right. So the questions we ask ourselves when we start a VGU project, is, at least in the design side, is always, is there anything cool in the character right now, and do we want to preserve it? In the case of Irelia, it was kind of obvious. Blade Surger Q was both a very iconic part of the character, and also the source of almost all of her cool plays, if you will. For the people who don't know what the spell is, it's basically a targeted spell. You click on a person or enemy, whatever, and you dash to the person, deal damage to it, and if that damage kills the person or unit, you can dash again. So depending on the situation, it allows Irelia to do a lot of interesting things that very few characters are actually capable of. Very few characters have potentially infinitely resetting dashes, and it allows players to express a lot of creativity when they're going into a fight or where they're exiting a fight. So we really like the spell, and this is a great spell, and we want to keep it. But at the same time, was it perfect? Was there something we wanted to make change about it that made it better? And we thought the answer was yes. The biggest reason was that because the reset trigger was on the kill, it didn't really occur that often in an actual champion to champions combat situation. Mainly because she's melee, and generally you don't deal damage until you actually get in close as a melee character. And generally the way you get in close is the dash. So you start the fight with the dash and not end with it. So we wanted to basically felt like, broaden the potentials of like resets in her like, dash gameplay and actually allow her to like, access that gameplay inside actual champion combat. So we wanted her rate to like, reset the spell in an actual versus a champion, and that led to the mark system that we have now. So the idea is simple. You can hit like enemies with like certain spells, and it'll like mark the champions. And if you dash to that said marked champion, it'll consume the mark and reset your dash and allow you to like dash one more time. So depending on your like an execution level, you can like dash multiple times, and you still have the kill trigger. So you can also like use your minions as like a dashing platform, hopefully leading to like a very flashy and like like creative like fighting style. So that was basically how we like quote unquote kept like a iconic portion of the kit. And the next one I want to talk about was kind of like a unique challenge actually for Irelia, where we were basically dealing with a character that had a very like range-centric fantasy. Like if you can imagine it, right? Like if you have like a person if you're a person who has a lot of like floating blades around you and you can like control them with your mind, how would you fight people with that thing? You would generally like stay pretty far and like just fling at people and kill them from afar. Like why would you want to go into like close range, right? But at the same time, we also didn't want to make that specific type of character where you just like stood back and like flung blades at people. And a couple of reasons. One was that she had a live legacy where she was like this melee character that like, what got in your face and basically hit you to death. The other one is that as we said before, we wanted to keep blade surge. And a target dash that brings you right on top of the enemy doesn't really fit on a character that's like, a ranged character. Why would you ever want to do that? You don't. So the challenge then was that we wanted spells that made the character feel like a ranged character just because that is the fantasy. But at the same time, it needed to not be like, detrimental to our melee gameplay. A good example would be, you could easily imagine like an Orianna type of character here, where Orianna is a character in our League of Legends where you can control a ball that kind of like sits in the world and do things on the ball. Like you could easily imagine, oh, she has like blades that she can like control on the world, and she can shoot them out and do stuff. At the same time, though, if you're a melee character, like being melee in League of Legends asks a lot of you. You need to like a lot of things are going around you. You don't have a lot of time to think about stuff. Like there's a lot of information coming at you, and asking you to basically control like separate or multiple separate entities was just not a thing when we were trying it. So yeah, so basically we were looking for like ways to get like feeling like a ranged character, like giving you the blade mancing fantasy. And this is like a in-dev like version, as you can see from the model, of like a version of her E that I was trying out. So this spell was basically you threw out two blades, one in succession, and they would basically converge towards whatever they hit. If they didn't hit anything, they converge towards each other. So you could basically hit someone with one of the blades and throw one to the back portion, which would then redirect back to the target, or vice versa. So this one's like the conversion. This is when you actually hit it. And all right. So you hit them with one, the other one like automatically hones back in, all that kind of stuff. So this is a really cool like thematic spell that really made you feel like you were controlling the blades. The issue that I ran into with this one was that when you were playing against the spell, there was the play against case was really unclear. Like you had to avoid like both blades because getting hit by one meant that you were getting hit by the other one. And you avoided both, and then you have to avoid the one where like the blades were coming towards each other, and it basically created this like really long and like like mind game that was like really difficult to actually process what you were supposed to do against it. So we decided to like trim it down to what we felt was the most interesting thing. And like as we're looking at it, the coolest version was basically the one where you tried to hit them for the converging blades, where you place both, and that's basically the live spell where you place two blades and they basically form a line towards each other and they fly towards each other. And if you hit them with the thing, you basically hit them. So yeah, so that basically concludes my portion. We're like talking about like how to figure out how to make a melee character that felt somewhat ranged.
So I have a question. Actually, when you are putting together the kit for a champion, is there a concession that you make where you say, okay, everybody expects this ability to be here, this ability to be here. We really want OG Irelia players to pick this up and feel immediately comfortable, or like how much is that a factor?
It was basically, you can call it as like, if we can do it, we should really try to do it. So if there's like an iconic spell or cool spell that we really like on the kit, like there's really not a lot of reasons to like take it out unless there's like, for some reason some reason or another we want to like change the character's class or something, which doesn't really happen that often. But like, you can see it with like most characters where like at least almost every character that I can recall has kept at least one spell, iconic spell from like their old kits. Like Poppy kept her E, Scion has his W, Warwick has like his Q, W, and Q, E, and R, and so on. So yeah, the answer was like, as often as possible.
We try, okay. Cool, so let's kick it over to John and talk about narrative, Irelia's story.
Yeah, hi guys, I'm John. I was a narrative writer on Irelia. And that, in addition to writing all the lore in VO, it also involves you being involved pretty early on with the development of the champion. And with the help of the other DNA members, you sort of figure out what motivates the champion and, what's going on in their head, where they come from, what they eat for breakfast, that sort of thing. And as silly as that sounds, that actually informs a lot of other aspects of them. So it's very important to all be aligned on that early on. And in the case of Irelia, we need to first look at where she comes from, which is Ionia, aka the First Lands. And in our world, which is called Runeterra, Ionia is the most magical place in that world. And the reason it's called the First Lands is because it is believed to be the place where magic first originated in Runeterra. And as you can see by these illustrations, there are tons of otherworldly beasts and demons walking around. There's a river of grass. There are things called Vastaya, which are kind of a human-animal hybrid. And the land itself is sentient, and it can defend itself in a number of magical ways. So, having said that, it is not a uniform place. There are a lot of different types of creatures, people. Yeah. I should have held the punchline longer, I guess.
Yeah, they read really fast.
I know. But you got the Kinku. All these guys have, agendas of their own. It's not a uniform continent. You got the Kinku, who enforce balance, and they're kind of ninjas. You got the Vastaya, who are, who I talked about earlier, the people, animals. You have the Order of the Shadow, who's kind of our nefarious group, who are primarily concerned with attaining power and will go to extreme lengths to acquire it. And we have a lot of kind of monks who are off doing their own thing. And then, of course, we have whatever this lady does. And in the middle of all that, we sort of had to figure out, well, where does Irelia fit in? And in her formative years, Ionia, her homeland, is invaded by Noxus, which is another nation, lies across the ocean. And we decided pretty early on that the most resonant thing about Irelia was the idea of her being this fierce defender of Ionia. And one of the things that's important to do when you're developing a character is you have to keep them from stepping on other characters. Otherwise, you have a bunch of characters who, agree on everything, and there's no sort of conflict or discussion among them, and it gets boring. So we sort of set this out, which is our Ionian aggro scale, and this is more or less how aggressive these champs are. Ionia is traditionally a very peaceful place. We have Karma representing that, who's the spiritual leader of Ionia. Then we have our Kinku, who are occasionally passive, and they're all about balance. So they'd probably be fine with some demons running around. They'd probably be fine with a few Noxians running around as long as they didn't overwhelm everything. And then we figured Irelia to be the one who is the defender and who draws a line in the sand and says, no Noxians on my homeland, and we either cut them down or drive them back to their ships. But then past her, we have our aggressor, who is Zed, and his like. And they are more of the mindset that, they will probably go to Noxus to assassinate their leaders and maybe take out some civilians. And then, of course, past him, we have our nut jobs who kill people for no good reason whatsoever. Irelia is more or less smack dab in the middle of this. She's between light and dark. I still think of her as more or less good aligned, but she thinks Zed is too extreme. But at the same time, she's willing to throw down. So this is kind of where she cut her teeth. This is, of course, the Placidium. If you're familiar with the lore, it's a place of great spiritual importance in Ionia. And when Irelia was only 14 years old, she and a few Ionian resistance fighters decided they were going to try to protect it. They were captured. It looked like Ionia was on the brink of surrender. And Irelia became the hero who broke free, cut down a bunch of Noxians, and turned the tide of the war. And so consequently, people from all over the continent began to come to her seeking leadership, whether she wanted it or not. And she was sort of forced to reluctantly grow into this role of leader. And that was a very important thing to convey in her VO. And this is what a VO script for League of Legends looks like. Isn't it beautiful? It's vomit green. It's Excel format. We could just look at it all day. But as you can see, she's got quite a few VO lines that are kind of rally cries. They're like, this is why we fight, press on sort of thing. And she's actually got a big bucket of team fight lines that kick in when she's with her teammates. Or sort of, dig in, this is where we make a stand sort of thing. The challenge in writing this stuff was actually figuring out, what does she talk about when she's not talking about that? So it was a challenge, but we sort of figured out a few places where we could sprinkle in like the softer side of Irelia. And I think we came up with a pretty decent balance.
So when you sit down and you talk about, okay, we know she's from Ionia, we've kind of got a vibe on who she is. When you start to write the story or the VO, what's that process like? Do you go in a lighthouse and light a candle alone?
Ideally. But when we can't do that, we have a team of narrative writers at Riot. The writer of the champ is primarily responsible for everything about that champ. But we also, we have a pretty good feedback system. We send out calls where other writers who may not have anything to do at the time will pitch lines to you. Probably about 20% of the script is, from other people suggesting lines. It doesn't even have to be writers. I mean, there are a lot of people at Riot who, if they're interested in narrative or, writing VO, may have the opportunity to pitch lines to us.
Cool. And then next, let's talk to Jim about art.
Hi, my name is Jem, and I draw pictures and happens to be made in a game. Okay, next one. So let's talk about the old Irelia, what she has, what's unique, what currently she has, which is her floating blades. But here again, like her floating blades doesn't actually do anything right now for somewhat like unique to her. Since like we have, in the game we have like different swordsmen like fencers or medieval swordsmen, samurais, and Wuju style, yeah, whatever. So what can we do with those floating blades? And we actually thought about like she should actually occupy the blade dancer trope. This way, there's no room for ambiguity, and that's why we do like spreads, a lot of like different Irelias, different costumes, maybe age range. The way how she uses blades can be different. These are just like wide variety of choices. Next, please. It's a lot of things to tackle, so we tackle it one by one let's focus on costuming first. How tanky is she? Should she more armored, more claws, more skin, less skin? I don't know. So yeah, this way, like doing more iterations, we'll see find her sweet spot through her costumes as well. And next is like.
Oh, I was
It's
going to
like-
ask, is there,
Oh, okay.
do different kinds of cloth read differently for different roles
Yes.
or different outfits?
It does, and it also confuses being more like Meiji and how squishy they look like in the game, I guess. So that's really important too.
I was curious.
All right. Next one is like how we actually recreate this blade dancer fantasy out of with floating blades. So this is where blade dancing comes in, where like we want to express the elegance and also the rhythm, because we want to make sure like she doesn't step in or like look like, you know, how Katarina just throws blades. Make sure she doesn't use these blades conventionally. Yeah, it also like wraps around her like new thematic, which is it's very graceful and it's also very dancery, and it's lots of blades. And next one, please. So as we actually decide, it was like, you know what could really look like in the game, we actually do proxies as well. So proxies are mainly like, it's kind of like a milestone thing where like we throw a very work in progress 3D version of her, and with basic animations like just basic attack, not even finish, and basic walk cycle. See like how it looks like when she actually runs around in the game, and then we throw them usually because sometimes like these blades look like, oh, these blades are occupying so much space. It starts to like, she feels so big and bigger than Trundle or even, you know, Scion. So let's actually cut that down. And then there are some cloth where like, it's too much. Now she felt so Meiji and stuff. We do that back and forth. Now we end up with the sweet spot, which is what we have right now. And speaking about sweet spot and movement, let's talk about animation.
Hey guys, I'm Jason. I was the animator on Irelia, and I know it's playing slow. This is actually kind of how animators watch their own animations all day to make sure it looks and flows nicely. And yeah, this is Irelia. Can we see her in game? Yeah, so basically I gather a lot of the things everyone's talked about, like a lot of Jem's concepting, a lot of John's ideas, and try making it so it looks visually cool. And those blades are really hard to do. But generally, Irelia is a blade dancer. So the idea I was trying to get across is that she flows pretty well during the game. She has like about 40 animations. That's a lot usually for League. And the reason why I put in so many is that most of the time your focus is on the blades, and they move really fast. So as she's flowing and moving slow and generally in dancer-like fashions, the blades are just slicing and dicing, doing their thing. And yeah, I mean, that's the visual idea of Irelia. I think stylistically, a lot of reference I used was from Tai Chi, Wu Chu, and jazz, I think. I think those are the three. Kind of like a mixture of Western and Eastern influences. And yeah, there's her alt. She's killing those Annies. Go to the next.
Rip.
Oh, you have to get the last one.
Is this it?
All right, okay, so here's some work in progress stuff. I'm not sure if the alt shape's the same. Anyway, try focusing on Irelia's animation. So that more or less is what's live right now. But if you see the one in the corner, it'll come soon. This was, I think, the original animation for Irelia. It's coming soon, sorry. All right, there
It's
it is.
one.
Yeah, there's one. So that was the original. So it looks all right. So like, I think it's the idea across. The main problem with this animation is that on the scale of like power, from Q, E, W, and everything, it's not that strong. Like, her Q looks stronger than this. So we felt like a really loud motion, like a nice huge backflip, would be readable to the player and the opponent. So everyone knows, like, you know, Irelia's coming, you know, things are going down, you know, get out of there, that kind of thing. Just clarity basically was the most important part of animating Irelia and dealing with her blades. And finally, I felt like her recall would be a really good moment to kind of harken back to who she used to be, because this is the moment of League where there's not really much fighting. You can kind of see the character go through the motions and everything, and yeah, this harkens back to who she used to be.
When she used to dance for fun.
Exactly.
Yeah. I actually have a couple questions. I'm curious, animation-wise, is there anything that was really, really hard to do, like different from another champion that was super hard?
The blades.
Yeah.
The blades, they're everywhere. No, yeah, actually, the blades are pretty hard. We have a really strong tech department at Riot, and that helped alleviate a lot of the technical part. Like, the only thing, for the most part, I had to concentrate on was the actual flow and animation of the blades, instead of like some crazy technical script that, yeah, it wasn't. I could concentrate on the creative side of it and not worry about technicalities that much.
Jem, how many different kinds of blades did you concept?
Just as her blades are a ton of blades were thrown away, and not only that, I have to do like a side, like paper cutting it and then try to form it in my desk, like a little bit arts and crafts as well. So yeah, because we wanted to make sure like her blades, what is that typical shape that works for everything that an animator would actually compose that motion of the blade. And her blades should look good as a swarm, but not just alone. So
Cool. Sol, hardest part of design?
The hardest part of design, I kind of like, alluded to it in my presentation, was that like mixing the ranged fantasy of the character on a very aggressive melee character.
That was really succinct. I wasn't expecting that. Yeah, and then tell me more. John, hardest part of the story, anything you get stuck on?
Hardest part of the VO script, how about that? Is like finding variation in attack lines. Different ways to say, "I'ma hit you." That is super hard. Story's hard, just for obvious reasons. Attack lines, I guess.
Different ways to say I'ma hit you. That's VO. That's what it is. That's pretty much everything for us. We can turn it straight over to Q&A if folks have questions about Irelia, Champ reworks, League. We're here. Who's got questions? I think there's a mic set up somewhere. Is it? There they are. Yeah, line up. Go on ahead and line up at the mics. That's how they've been doing it. And we'll go and we'll do this. Does that make sense?
Left, right,
Cool.
left, right.
So let's start over here.
Oh, wow.
There's a lot of them.
So I was wondering if, this mic's really loud. Will I ever see anything from Aurelia's old kit, like, not even just mechanically. I think her old weapon was really cool because it's like a skateboard.
The big blade?
Yeah, and also I think the whole idea of equilibrium strike, doing different things at different health thresholds, is a really interesting mechanic. So are there any future plans to bring stuff like that back in upcoming champions? Oops, sorry.
So I can't talk about the skateboard because that would be Jem's thing. I'm not sure. But about the health threshold portion, one of the issues, I agree that it actually had some like cool portions to it where it made it so like she could like do different things depending on like a condition she didn't have like full control of, but like good players could like sometimes like game it to their own like way. But at the same time, the specific one that she had was very difficult to like balance out, mainly because it felt very bad for the enemy in a lot of cases where what you're supposed to do against this character that gets stronger if she's lower percentage of health than you, like you're supposed to not hit her at the start, right? And so you're basically you're encouraged to not take action against the character, and like so she is, but she doesn't want to do that either because she's weaker if she like starts the action against you. So you have this weird like standoff like no one really wants to do anything to the other guy first kind of land.
Oh, sorry. Surfboard champs?
you mean skateboard?
Skateboard?
Okay.
Big boards?
So skateboards, too many thematics fitting in one will make the whole champion very ambiguous. And she still surfs on her blade during her home guard, and that's a huge nod already. And it's just making her thematic a lot cleaner, but the purpose of like the actions about the skateboard thing, we want to still stay true to it, but not holistically keep it 100% because it's muddying her thematic.
Also, I think overall, probably the answer for every question about future champions is like, maybe. I can't talk about it probably. Well, we probably could, but then we get fired.
Yeah, I mean, like, the mechanic itself is, like, it may return if we could, like, find a way to iron out the stuff, because there is cool stuff about it, but, like, yeah, hopefully someone does.
Cool. How about over here?
So when you're reworking these champions, do you look at the items that people build on them right now, and do you try to like make them work on the new champion, or sometimes it just doesn't work out?
We try, generally, if there's no other, like, trade-offs you're making, or at least, like, not big trade-offs you're making, it's always better to, like, preserve what you can about the old champion, and item builds are honestly, like, a decent degree of that, and especially on a character that has a very iconic item pass, that is even double the case. So Irelia specifically was actually one of those cases where I went into the project with the goal of, I am going to make Triforce the most optimal item on this character, come hell or high water, and yeah.
Triforce. Oh, how about over here?
Hi. So you
Oh,
talked
Nintendo
about
sues me.
balancing out the design. My question is more or less balancing out in the gameplay. How do you decide how to make a character new without making it, well, too OP, balanced out against other characters? Because obviously when you showed us the video, she looks like, well, she can basically take on anyone. But I'm guessing that's obviously not the case.
No, that is not the case. The videos are generally quite exaggerated. It's not like
Yeah.
a lie, because it's not something that cannot happen, like, technically, but it also won't really happen unless you're so fed you can one-shot people with a Q somehow. Anyways, so yeah, how to balance the champion. Basically, the biggest thing we try to, like, the guideline would be that every champion should have a strength, but that's generally not a problem, because you're trying to make an interesting champion, and those champions tend to have strengths. The harder part is basically making sure that the champion has weaknesses. What is this champion weak against? Is there, like, a specific type of situations that the character is weak against? Is the champion bad against certain types of, like, enemies? Is the champion bad against, like, certain types of kits? All that kind of stuff. And for Irelia's case, we decided that she was a character that was going to have a lot of mobility, a lot of agency in what she could do, and a lot of ways to basically fight the people that she wanted to fight, which are generally tend to be like squishies when she, like, dives to the back line. So we felt that, like, it was a good weakness for the character to have if, like, she was actually not that great against, like, tanks or other immobile, like, very beefy, like, targets comparatively. Just because she has the tools to not fight them if she doesn't have to, and if she's in a situation she has to fight them, then either she misplayed the situation or the game state is in a very unfavorable state for her, and that's not necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah, I think there's also a lot to be said for the difference between like a few people playing it and a few million people playing it. What? What? Oh. Hi. Let's just go to you. I heard you and I got confused. Go right over here to the right. Over here.
Oh, boy. Oh, sorry about
hi.
that.
Don't worry about it.
So
We're
my
new too.
question relates more to the lore and the story, because I really love character interactions and hearing about those. One thing that I was really interested about how Swain and Irelia, like, they seem like huge rivals, and they have this whole relationship to leadership where Irelia gets it but doesn't want it, and Swain has to really fight for it, and he finally gets it, and that's just what he's wanted all his life. So I wanted to know if that, like, relationship, if that's intentional, or if Irelia really doesn't care about Swain anymore, or does she have any other important relationships to characters in Ionia or Noxus that she wants to fight or be friends with, or wants to bolster to fight Noxus?
That's a
Anything
really
like
good
that.
question. I do like how they're kind of mirrored in that respect, that one wants leadership and one doesn't, but has it anyway. I don't think she's really itching for a fight. I mean, she's more interested. She's kind of only interested in, like, her piece of Ionia and making sure that it stays free. And unless somebody comes trampling across the ocean wanting to fight her or her people, I don't see why she would engage them. But that could change if we see some compelling reason for her to fight someone across the ocean.
Cool. How about over here?
Hi. With champions that you redesign, do you try and keep them to the role that players were forcing them into? Like when you redesigned Irelia, was she always going to be still a top lane champion? Or did you consider, hey, maybe we should try and also make her be able to jungle or play mid?
We place the most importance in like almost ensuring that a champion can be played in the role that he or she was able to be played in. And basically from there, we want to generally we view diversity of roles as a good thing now. And we try to make it so that a champion can be played in multiple roles if one, it doesn't it doesn't become the new clearly best role. Generally we found that players generally dislike it when their champion is taken away from their favorite role or whatever. And also ensuring that the gameplay of the character from that separate role is not degenerate or unhealthy for the game. Some characters just should not be coming from the jungle, for example, or some characters should just not be in mid lane. There's just some characters that don't work that way. And
Thank you.
How about over here?
Hi. Looking at a lot of your older champions that you've reworked, it seems like a lot of them, it goes from a more vague idea to a lot more focused. And I'm wondering if, as you're trying to find that one focus, if you find other aspects like, oh, we could have gone with this, maybe we'll pocket this and bring it into another champion or another rework. How often that happens, if at all?
Are you talking about through visuals or just generally a champion?
Visuals, kit, lore, if Irelia could have been this but wasn't, maybe we make another champion of that, or if there was this kind of blade that we'll bring into somebody else.
Yeah, when you got 140 champions, it does get, if somebody has more than one attribute that's prominent, it does seem like you want to simplify that and use the other prominent attribute that you're not using for that champ for someone else, because you're going to run out of stuff.
right, if the attribute in question that we basically decided wasn't going to work for the said character is a cool one and we want to bring it back, there is nothing saying that we wouldn't bring said attribute back in a future champion.
Yeah, if there's not a really specific one, there's a lot of ideas in reworking or making a new champion that get set kind of on a idea shelf, and every now and then they show up in a new thing or pop up somewhere else.
Yeah, actually almost all the at least 60% of the stuff that you see in new kits or reworked kits are ideas that have been sitting around the design pit in design's case for a pretty long time. Zoe's sleeve, for example, was a concept that people have been talking about for honestly over a year, 2 years maybe or something like that. We're hey, I think it'd be cool if a character had sleep, and multiple champions actually had that kind of thing in their prototypes, and it got discarded for one reason or another. It didn't fit the character at the time. We couldn't find a great way to balance the mechanic or whatever. But at some point, someone finds a way to integrate the kit into a champion that really wants it, and then you have that in the game.
Thanks.
Cool. How about over here?
Yeah, my question's more about when you rework characters, a lot of the newer ones I've noticed, you're moving away from a simple character design to something a little more complex with more in-depth abilities. Like in the Warwick rework, it was a very straightforward character before the rework, and now he has more in-depth abilities. So I'm just wondering is League moving away from simple character designs to something that is more complex? Or is there any idea later on that you might rework somebody and keep that simplicity, someone like Garen that you talked about earlier, without changing, making them more complex, but still, buffing them or upping them in the current meta?
So that's a kind of yes and no, I guess. That's kind of a difficult question to answer in a word. But generally, as there's so many champions in the game at this point, something that it's very difficult to find a simple concept and a simple kit that'll not collide with any other champion that's already in the game. That is one, and the other one is that our League player base has pretty much matured a lot. So compared to 8 years ago when basically MOBAs are pretty much a relatively new or niche or hardcore thing, the kind of like kits that people could play back in the day and the kind of kits that people can play these days are very different. Like Insect, the Lee Sin kick someone backwards was like an amazing play when it first came out of season 3, right? But now you see like, gold Lee Sins do it, right?
Hey, gold is great. Gold is super good.
Hey, I'm in gold. Like, so.
Yeah, that's the thing. Okay. Speaking more broadly, I don't think anyone would ever come down and say, this is the clear direction that every single champion would go. I think in an ideal world, the kind of experience you want to have is represented for you, right? And if you want to play a simpler, I don't want to say simpler as if like that's a bad thing, but if you want to play like a simpler champion that's more about the decisions that you make as opposed to your mechanical skills, like I would hope that we would like embrace that and keep those options available to people like that.
Yeah, there's a reason we still have like, Annie, Garen, like, like those type of Malphite, those type of characters in the game. It's not just because we haven't had the time to rework them. I highly doubt we would ever like rework Annie, for example, or probably even Garen, like at least not in a significant way that makes the character like mechanically intensive to play. Because you do need like characters that are like, more simple, easy to pick up, and like, sometimes you just don't want to be like hitting like a million buttons in 2 seconds. So you do need people to be able to play like characters that are not like so like hectic.
Cool.
All right, thank you.
How about over here?
Hello. I've been in
Hi.
Irelia main since season 2, so my question is more game design focused. There's a big gameplay theme in Irelia's old kit that shows in Irelia's new kit about conditional power, and you were talking a little bit about it with Equilibrium Strike, how you play the game, and good Irelia players can set it up, right? And there's like a bunch of small things that are mirrored from old Irelia's kit, like how old Irelia would use her ult to set up Qs on minions, and now her new ult sets up Qs on champions. And how did you guys come to that design? Because it kept a lot of us Irelia mains like intact on our gameplay. So how did you guys go through that process, and like what was the iterations before that led you there?
So basically, in this specific case, it was more of like honestly, it was a goal because we wanted to preserve the gameplay of Blaze Surge, and good Irelia players were already good at like identifying like potential targets they could Blaze Surge to, and then like using that situation to be to their advantage. And the gameplay that we built, where like we were expanding the Blaze Surge like a gameplay to be usable on champions, basically meant that Irelia players who are like very accustomed to like looking for those types of like targets that are not the targets they're fighting right now, but like people to the peripherals were like, oh, this is like a potential Blaze Surge target in like 3 seconds kind of deals, would flourish with that type of gameplay. So one, it like was almost like a natural like, like consequence of the way we took the kit, but at the same time, it was also like very intended. It was a goal that like, we wanted that even though the specific mechanics were decently different, we wanted like, players who were dedicated Irelia players to actually feel like, oh, I can actually play this champion. What this champion asks of me is relatively similar to like, what I was like, what I felt the pride in like, getting really good at as an Irelia player. And we felt like Blaze Surge Control was literally basically that.
Cool. How about over here?
Hi. So my question is, with the introduction to Ruins and Masteries, which happened somewhat recently, it was introduced as a way to, have different type of gameplay styles where you can play against champions in different styles and stuff like that. My question, however, is that given the introduction of these ruins, we're starting to have, different benefits that are overlapping in different regions. So for example, you're having Revitalize, which has like bonus healing in the Resolve tree, or you're having Ingenious Hunter, which gives item cooldown reduction, something that, a support would have that we are having in the Domination tree. Why are we having these, overlapping masteries in different regions instead of, having them all centered in, let's say, Inspiration, where the support actually has to make a decision between, let's say, having specialized item cooldown reduction versus, let's say, having max cooldown reduction for their spells?
We felt like generally that there was like there would be a lot of interest if like, the tree that you went in was not always that the support tree or the ADC tree or the tank tree or whatever. Basically, we wanted reasons for like, classes that were not typically the users of that tree to go into like in a set tree for like in a special benefits. And the combinations that they could like, opposed to like a support always going like, for example, inspiration sorcery or something, if supports like, had like good reasons to go something like inspiration resolve or like, even like precision inspiration, whatever, what have you, we felt like that was like a richer like, decision tree in the future for the long term, basically.
Yeah, and I think in a good system, like when you want people to make decisions, like what do I want to do? What's optimal for me in this thing? And there needs to be a trade-off, right? Or that's how I understand it as a comms goal.
Yeah, you could argue that like the trade-off for picking a specific like rune that you want in an off tree is that you are giving up the benefits that your primary tree grants you, and sometimes it hopefully there are situations where that like that decision is worth it, and sometimes it's not.
How about over here?
Is it okay if I ask 2 questions?
I'm fine with it.
All right. First off, I'm a very big fan of the old Irelia and also a big fan of the new one. I think that out of her 4 abilities, the W is the least similar to the old kit. And so I was wondering what the inspiration behind making the W the way that it is, like instead of anything else.
Yeah, sure. The W was the last piece of the kit, basically. Though the kit came in basically in the order of like Q because it had to keep it, E because we were looking for an interesting way to apply the mark, and then the passive because it like synergized well with the Q gameplay of the character. The ult was because it was like we wanted a good team fighting like in a mark application tool. So we had the E, we had the W that was like the left, like the blank slot. And I always wanted like a defensive spell here because I generally find that like defensive spells are very interesting for lane play and also like create like ways for like players to survive in like team fights, which we really wanted the new Irelia to be good at, and basically give a skill test where if you can use this spell like in the team fight situation, you will be able to survive for like much longer than you would normally do. So we were looking for like what kind of defensive spells we wanted out of this like slot. And the first one's and I've always like really liked spells like meditate, where the entire premise of the spell is that you have a character that's moving really fast and they're doing a lot of damage / like putting a lot of pressure on you. But the premise of meditate is that if you can actually like push that character into an unfavorable position, the character has to basically stop their aggression on you, more or less. They don't get to just like turn on their like defensive story and keep going at you, and like you're just going like, well, okay, like what do I do now kind of situation. So on a character that has like a lot of agency and a lot of like like speed and like threat, I've generally find that kind of like, how do you call it, stasis moment to be a very good like release valve for the enemy, but also for like the character herself, where you are basically making a lot of like split-second decisions that like really quickly, and having a moment that you can basically like hit the button, be reasonably confident you're not going to die immediately, and then basically be able to like plan out what you're going to do during that time frame was like a very valuable like portion. So the original spell that was in the slot was a Zhonya's, literally. She like Zhonya's herself and like wasn't targetable, couldn't move, and then it like expired after a little bit. And the feedback was that, oh, this thing feels like this is good, but it feels odd that like I have to like basically freeze myself for a long period of time, and like people like Irelia was a very like fluid character, and people didn't want to necessarily have a button that said don't move for X seconds kind of deal. So we basically like moved to more of like a modular spell where you have the choice of like holding it as long as you want, and holding it like releasing it early also gives you like some degree of benefit, as in the form of like passive stacks or adding a little bit more burst damage.
What's the second question? And we only have 5 minutes left, so we're gonna let's try and do these pretty rapid fire, and then we're gonna be out there after this. If you don't have a chance, we'll try to get to as many folks as we can.
My second question is lore related. So 3 things in the old lore that I didn't see in the new lore were the Heaton style that her dad used to have, her brother Zalos, and her mantle of decorum. I was wondering if those do not exist anymore.
Her brother Zalos is in the new lore. He is just unfortunately deceased. But as far as her father being her master goes, it's interesting because she's a dancer now. We needed one person in particular to be a person that she mourns and sort of, seeks vengeance for above all others. And we kind of decided that should be the person who taught her art. That's probably the simplest and easiest route to go. And that is her grandmother in the lore. So she sort of took prominence over her dad, just because she's the person who made her what she is. Yeah, sorry. What was the other thing? Was
The mantle.
Yeah, and that of course is now, I guess, her family crest. It needed to be something, I think, that was significant to her family, rather than just a random magic item, I think, or something that was significant to Ionia, but not her family specifically.
So, like in game or in universe lore, she no longer has the mantle.
Basically, I can answer that question. The mantle of decorum, just like what John said, is actually her family crest. When you actually see it in League roadmap, and Noxians rambled on her stuff and break it, and the whole mantle of decorum or the crest turns into her blades. So she still has it, but in a different form.
Cool.
Thank you.
How about over here? We'll try to go quick.
So for the skins, it's a rework, right? So how does the design process work for new skins?
We try to keep the things that we wanted to keep and also what the fans wanted to keep as well.
Okay. Yeah, it's hard.
Hi. Weird question. So every season there's a new meta of champions, right? Where the meta changes. I'm just curious, is there some sort of collective goal in mind of the design pods to create like a pick rate equilibrium between the roles? Do you understand my question?
Sure. If you're asking more in the vein of like, hey, should every champion be picked similarly, like throughout the roles? That's probably not a goal, mainly because that's probably impossible. Because unlike a lot of hardcore players, a lot of League players pick a character based on their theme or their in a fantasy or their coolness or whatever kind of thing. Like Yasuo is not our most popular champion for years because he was always the meta champion, right? Like, when's the last time you saw Yasuo in pro play? I don't know, whenever. Kayn also sees pretty limited pro play. Lee Sin used to be a pro play god, but he's not been that for a decent amount of time. Riven's not been really relevant, all that kind of stuff. So no, not really. So pick rate is not necessarily just a straight reflection of power or even balance in the game.
Mm-hmm. Over here.
So my question is how do you manage the roster in terms of increasing, adding a new champion or reworking a new one? How does Riot weigh what to do?
Basically, as the roster gets bigger, the burden on the new champion or the rework to be more unique just gets higher. Obviously, because there's just more things to not overlap with. So we try to and as you've seen, we've slowed our new champion process significantly, in the recent years, mainly because we are at the point where we feel new champions need to be very unique when they come out. Otherwise, they won't be able to carve out their place in the game anymore. So we spend a lot more time for on their development because we need them to be something that you never saw in League of Legends before.
Thanks. How about over here?
Hey, so I'm just curious, what was it like to just lose the best designer, certainly T, from your team, who does the redesigns? And how do you think that he would have, what do you think he would have done with Irelia?
Dude, Brad's crazy. I don't know what he would do.
I don't know if we can speak for him, but...
I mean, so also certainly T, or Brad as I call him a lot, has actually not been on the rework team with the exception of Warwick. And a Kali who's now he's working on, but it's not out yet. So actually most of the reworks have not been done by him. So yeah, I'm not sure about the first question, honestly.
We're actually out of time. I don't want us to run too far over in this theater. So like I said, we'll meet y'all out there and we can talk some more. Thank you for coming. Thank you so much for being here. Thanks, Plan League.